Well, the Judicial Conduct Tribunal has recommended that Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe be impeached. That recommendation now goes before Parliament, which will make the final determination on John Hlophe's future. In fact, this is the first time in democratic South Africa that a judge has faced impeachment. Joining us to, I guess, place the significance of this development, also help us track the origins and the implications. Let's bring in Newsroom Africa's news editor, Dianne Hawker, who's live to us now in our studio. Usually, you and I, Dianne, will speak for a long time in the newsroom. It's great to have you in studio this time around. And this is because it's one of those stories where we just had to bring you in. Yeah. Let's first distinguish between where the Judicial Conduct Tribunal and the Judicial Service Commission enter in the story. Help us distinguish the roles they've played in getting us here.
Well, it's a bit of a complicated process, and I suppose that's also because it's quite a complex process to try and remove a judge for misconduct. The Judicial Service Commission is the mother body, and all the processes involving the appointment or removal of judges fall within their territory, essentially. And they have the power to appoint a tribunal when there are disputes of fact as in a complaint against a judge, which is what we saw here with the Hlophe case. The Judicial Service Act has it kind of lays out the process, and there's various things that must happen. First, there must be an affidavit with a complaint submitted. After that, that complaint goes to the Judicial Service Conduct Committee. The committee will decide if there's an issue to actually be argued or looked at, and then they refer that, if needed, to a tribunal. The tribunal will investigate, and only after that, then the Judicial Service Commission will make a decision. And that's because the Constitution actually places that responsibility within the ambit of the Judicial Service Commission. So essentially that report that was received after the December tribunal, they had to look at it, they had their own deliberations over it, and then they made their own decision, which will ultimately then go to the National Assembly.
Right. So those are the institutions involved, but it's taken a long time to get here, over a decade or so.
Yeah.
Let's take a look back before we step forward. Take us through perhaps some of the salient moments that you reckon are worth remembering as we try to figure out what happens next.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the tribunal actually had a rerun because of some court cases that took place that found that the initial process that took place a couple of years ago was actually not done correctly. We've seen possibly more than 10 court cases in this matter being brought by various parties, by Judge Hlophe himself, by the Helen Suzman Foundation, by the Democratic Alliance as well, as former Premier Helen Zille. And what it led to is that tribunal that we covered in December last year. And I think sort of the key parts that came out of there was there were 4 testimonies that took place. That of Judge Hlophe, Judge Bess Ngabinde, Judge Chris Jafta, as well as a Zulu language interpreter who spoke about that phrase, "Sesthembele Nina," which I think will go down in South Africa's history as one of the most talked about Zulu phrases. But just looking at the testimony of Judge Bess Ngabinde, I think that when you look at the tribunal's report and possibly also on the deliberations of the JSC, what she said in that inquiry was really what kind of finalized everything, how she felt about the conversation that was had. And it's also important just to remember that this really also deals with another big matter, the Zuma case, right? So the allegations against Judge Hlophe was that he had gone to the Constitutional Court and tried to influence 2 judges. One was Judge Jafta and one was Judge Ngabinde. He obviously denied that. But let's take a listen to what Judge Ngabinde had to say.
He did not seek to improperly persuade me. In my sense, he was attempting to influence me.
So help us place why that's important.
Well, the question was about what kind of a conversation this was. And there was a different interpretation from Judge Hlophe as compared to the other 2 judges. They were saying it was completely unusual and unheard of for another judge to come to the Constitutional Court and discuss an ongoing case with judges who were in the process of actually deciding on the matter. His response was that he didn't actually know that it was an incorrect thing to do, and that he felt that he was just meeting with colleagues and expressing his personal views. Let's take a listen to some of what he said.
At what point did you become aware that if you were not a judge of the Constitutional Court or sitting as a judge at the Constitutional Court, you were not permitted to discuss cases with judges of that court? At what point for the very first time?
The very first time it was when, if my memory serves me well, when Judge Hlophe filed his reply. That's when I became aware of it for the first time, because he referred to the practice in the Labor Appeal Court as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal, and he added that he doesn't know whether I knew about that rule because I never sat in those courts.
Yes.
Right. That was the first time.
Yeah.
All right, so those are just some of the moments during the hearings that are important, but we also know that despite it taking about 8 months or so to get here, the JSC itself appears to be somewhat divided about whether or not they should give the kind of recommendation that might lead to an impeachment. Yeah,
we understand that there was a split in their decision after their deliberations, and that they'll be sending 2 reports to the National Assembly. And this is now where we actually enter what would be the final stretch of an impeachment process. In terms of Section 177 of the Constitution, for a judge to be impeached, there actually has to be a recommendation from the JSC as well as a National Assembly decision of 2/3 for that to actually be finalized. So now the National Assembly will receive those 2 reports, a majority report and a minority report, and we are likely to then see a vote taking place in Parliament that will ultimately decide on what is going to happen. In the meantime, however, Judge Hlophe will have an opportunity to submit to the JSC a recommendation or commentary on whether he should be suspended or not be suspended in the meantime. And just so that one can understand the stakes, judges get paid for life so that they continue to do service for the state. That's why we see many retired judges coming back and overseeing tribunals and that kind of thing. So if a judge is impeached, they lose all those kinds of benefits, whether it be the protection, the salary, all the benefits that come with being a judge in South Africa. So the stakes are quite high, in personal stakes in relation to this.
I wonder whether we can trust our MPs to have some kind of agreement around this very quickly. I know we are now entering the terrain of politics, really, given the configuration of our political party system in this country. But what are the prospects of there being a 2/3 majority agreement on how we should actually move here?
Well, I think that the MPs will really have to look at the information on the table. Yeah. The hearing was public, and hopefully many of them will have watched that process. I'm also hoping that, whatever debates take place around this before the vote are also something that's quite widely watched by the public. And of course, we've got that comprehensive report by the tribunal, and they'll also have the reports from the JSC itself. And hopefully they'll look at all of this information and lead them to the decision that will lead to whichever way they vote. But as you said, you never really know what's going to happen in the domain of politics, and the Constitution is clear. It requires both the recommendation of the JSC and the National Assembly to vote for that process to be finalized.
Tell you what, it's a major development, but we're nowhere near the end just yet. Dianne Hawker, thanks very much indeed. She's Newsroom Africa's news editor, joining us here in our studios.